Hello, and as it's another Sunday, it means another review. So welcome back to The Walking Dead World Beyond Season 2, Episode 8 review. And this episode has a lot going on. There was a lot of plots in this episode, and you might think that does ruin it a little, but with all these plots, they do tie in at the end, so which is really good. So what are all these plots? Well, I will name a few, because it's quite a lot. You have the plot at the Perimeter community, you have the Dennis and Xylus plot, you have the Jadis and Huck plot, and then you have the Leo plot, which kind of mixes in with Hope and Iris too. Now, hearing that this episode has so many plots, you might think the pacing is not very good, and some plots are worse than the others. But actually, no. All four, plots A, B, C, D, and the pacing is all really good. It transitions between each plot very well. At the start of the Perimeter plot, I thought it would be bad, but it turns out to be good. The start of this episode, I did not like it at all because it had Elizabeth Kubrick in it, and she was literally just there in a flashback, and I'm like, don't give me hope that she returns to the show just being a flashback, and that really ruined it. I was like, oh well, that's a bad start. I just didn't like the starter. You give me Elizabeth Kubrick at the start, and she's not in anything else, which really annoys me. But other than that start, which really annoyed me, this episode is pretty good. There's no issues other than some of the acting, but the story is really good this episode. It moves on really well, and the overall premise is that you have all these plots going on, but they all move on to the same thing. They all have the same objective, which is try and get the scientists and Leo and Hope and Iris and Felix and all that out of the facility, and everything's moving towards that. And I really like it. My favourite part of this whole thing is Jez, because she's a big part of this episode. She's a massive part of this episode. And she's just going through all these really smart choices. And you're like, I love a villain when they just make always the right choices, they don't make something stupid. And even the child characters who always make stupid decisions, look at season 1, make really smart decisions this episode. Hope does a mega big brain thing, which I think she's gone off to do something stupid. But no, they destroy that romance they're going to have with Hope, and it just ends up with being this mega brain. I'm like, bam, Hope, you just got points. And I really like how smart all the characters of this episode. Everything makes sense. There's no leaps of logic in this episode. Everything just works. Everything's very tightly knit, and the story is really good, and it moves on through so much, and it really paints a clear picture of what's going to happen at the end. It paints a picture, and we could probably guess at this point how it's going to end. And I really like how we're finally getting a story, and we finally have a plot now. Shame that we're right at the end of this show, but we finally got a plot in the final fourth of the show. However, even though this episode does sound really good, there are points where this episode is bad, and as I mentioned earlier, the acting is not very good. It's not much to do with Iris. She was a bit better this episode because she had less to do in this episode. She was really annoying last episode, but she toned down a bit this episode. It's more on Xylus because he had a very big role this episode, and his acting was just so bad and so monotone. It really removes any emotion that they tried to give him this episode. There's a big emotional part in this episode, and it's with him, and you're like, well, I don't care. It just really cuts away very fast with him. And you're like, well, they probably cut away because he couldn't hold a dramatic scene or something. Which really annoyed me how bad his acting. Even in this episode, we can see how bad his acting is because they put him up against a better actor, the guy who playing Dennis and Xylus, and they're just kind of talking. As they're going for the conversation, things get heated. And you can tell with Dennis, the actor changed the way his voice was, changed the way he looked. He came off as whispering, he's a bit intimidated. He came off differently, he changed, he adapted how he was, he showed emotion for his character. Xylus just kind of stood there going, well, blah blah blah. Even though they're basically starting to argue, he didn't change the way he was acting. It's just his arguing way and his normal way were the same, and that quite annoyed me. I really don't like Xylus this episode because they gave him a lot to do emotionally wise, and he just kind of does nothing, and they kind of wasted that emotional bit they had at the end of this episode with putting it with Xylus, and it's really annoying. Another bit I don't like is that Percy and Elton, two main characters that should have been killed off, okay, and they're in this episode. Percy is actually a background character and does nothing. He was last episode and the previous episode before that. And Elton was the same. Literally, he was just kind of stood there while Will was kind of pushing forwards the plot with the Perimeter and the leader of the Perimeter. They're pushing forwards the plot. And Will's going to tell the leader, what happened to his son. I didn't care too much, but it was handled well. I thought it would be handled really badly, but it's handled well with the emotions. Just Elton kind of stood there, and they had a really long moment with him just staring at a leaf. And I was like, that's a wasted character that should have been killed off, and that quite annoyed me how they're having characters that should have died already still in this episode taking up screen time, when the more interesting characters like Jadis, Huck and Leo Bennett and Felix are kind of being not getting that screen time. They're being reduced so these stupid characters can get them. I do want to talk about the standout characters of this episode, and it's definitely going to be Jadis. She's a scene stealer. I'm so happy she has such a big role, because when we saw her in the trailer for this season, I thought maybe she'd be in 1 or 2 episodes, but no. And with episode 5 and 6, I was worried because she was basically in a cameo at the end and at the start and the end of those episodes. But now she's like a big part of the role. She steals the scenes. And she's basically now, in my opinion, the protagonist, even though she's the main villain, protagonist of this episode. I really, really like her. She's so good as the villain. She comes off intimidating, she comes off as smart. She is just a very good, like, evil, calculating villain who believes in what she does, and I'm really like how she's portrayed, because you believe that she believes she's doing the right thing. You don't believe she's evil, you believe she's just doing what she thinks is right, and it's so good. I really love her as the villain because she makes so much sense. She's intelligent, she's so nice. It's a shame we've lost Elizabeth Kubelik because she was really good. I really loved her at the start of this episode, start of this season. She was so good. It's a shame she kind of was removed from the season. I would have loved to have those two characters, Jadis and Elizabeth, be villains together, but shame we didn't got that. We got them separated. I do have some kind of like honorable mention characters, and that's definitely Huck, because she went from being the like surprise villain of season 1 to being a character that you're like, yes, I forgive you, you're a protagonist again. She's a very good anti-hero. I quite like her arc, and she was handled very well. I feel like the show should have focused more on the people in the CRM like Huck and Jadis and Elizabeth, and not on the kids, because I feel like they are the more compelling characters. And Leo is quite nice. I don't know why I just quite like Leo. He's a very intelligent character and he makes a lot of sense. He hasn't done anything stupid yet. But other than those 3 characters, all the other characters were kind of bland. Like Felix kind of got nothing. Iris had nothing. She's never done nothing. Hope had a kind of spark of intelligence. But all the other characters are bland other than those 3. Now let's do my one word / one sentence overview, and this episode is fantastic. This is the best episode we have got yet for World Beyond, and I would recommend watching this episode. Like, this is a great episode. To anyone who's already watching the show, I recommend you have to watch this episode. This episode is great telly. It's so much fun. It is so weird how we went from this show being like a crime on television to this show being better than some of the Walking Dead seasons. Like, I really like these previous episodes that we've had very recently and this episode, and I think the last episode is going to be fantastic. This episode is fantastic. It's so much fun. It's paced well. The characters are getting good. Not the child characters though, like all the adult characters. I love Jadis. She steals the show. Huck is great. But what do you think about this episode? Please tell me down below. And if you want more videos, look on the screen. You will find something else there you like, guaranteed. And I will see you later. So goodbye. Peace out. Talk to you later.